Hey, hello, I'm Anirudh, a sixth year student doing masters here. And yeah, today's talk will be about automated theorem proving, or to be specific, yeah, interactive theorem proving, a humble computers math PhD dissertation. So we'll be exploring how you can teach uh, computers math, like whatever an average undergraduate or graduate mathematician, a math student can do. We're trying to see how we can teach that to computers. So yeah, the talk will be in four parts. So the first thing is I'll talk about what verified mathematics is and why we need it. Second thing is yeah, the title itself, what these so-called theorem provers are. And once I describe them, you'll obviously want to know how they exactly work because they seem too fancy and unrealistic. And finally, just a few remarks on like this field of research and technology. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. So before verified mathematics, let's just talk about math. Like we've been doing math for like ages now. Like we've done so much math. We've invented like mathematicians have over generations invented so many things, so much that we have used, found useful, like applied in different fields like physics, chemistry, biology, you name it. And like every generation we have more and more breakthroughs being made, like famous mathematicians coming up with results. And we have so much mathematical tools and machinery that we learn today. And yeah, like if you look at it in the 21st century, we just have too much math. If you want, like for example, if you were born in the first century, you'll probably have to not learn anything. You can just go and say something and somebody might listen to you. Like you can go roam around the streets of Greece and just blabber random shit, and most likely one of those results could actually be a breakthrough in mathematics. But that's not how it is today. If you have to actually do something useful in like actually contribute something useful to mathematics, you'll have to go through school and then college, and then you get a master's degree, and then you get a PhD, and then postdocs, then you become a prof, and then you start working, and finally maybe 20, 30 years later, after studying everything and working with all the complications that we have, you might produce something new, completely new. And yeah, like this has become a tedious process, and currently it's somewhat streamlined. Math researchers, like whenever they work on some problem and they get something, a result, theorem or anything, they write a paper and submit it to some conference or journal, and the journal reviewers will also be other researchers in the field who are aware of what is going on. They'll read those papers, they'll try to look for mistakes, they'll try to verify whether all the arguments, all the steps are correct. And yeah, if everything turns out to be correct, yeah, they'll just accept it. But yeah, it is likely that we do make mistakes. uh, Very often than not, in some field we are not very aware of, it's very easy to convince somebody of a wrong claim, which sounds very good, sounds very true and accurate and scientific, but just could be wrong. And I think with, for example, with COVID becoming such a widespread thing, there are so many facts and rumors going around, and some of them, a lot of scientific, quote unquote, scientific facts that people have come up with. And like, you really can't tell unless you're an expert in the field. Everything might sound very accurate and scientifically sound, but it just could be complete, like completely incorrect. So yeah, humans do make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes we don't notice these mistakes. And for example, in research, once a paper is submitted and accepted, it's mostly taken for granted. Like you just take the result for granted to be correct, and you don't bother rechecking or anything like that in the future, which is not a very great thing because yeah, you creep in one wrong result with some inaccuracy, and people build a lot of math on that, and then it all breaks the moment you realize, okay, something, was wrong at the very start. So yeah, like verifying research level publications, which like school level is very easy. Like teachers can check because it's very basic math. But yeah, college level gets harder. Like graduate level gets much harder. And yeah, research level publications, which especially in very like published by the top mathematicians, is very hard to verify because they're very complex and very few people know exactly what is going on in that field. You don't have many people doing it, and you don't have many people who understand exactly what's happening. So yeah, like I mean, it will be good if we have some solution to overcome this, be able to verify math in a more streamlined fashion, something we can trust more without having to trust every reviewer, every person, and hope that none of them have made any mistakes, which is a lot to ask for. So how do we do it? Uh, any guesses? I'll give 5 seconds.
Can you use ML?
Use ML. Okay. Yeah, that could be a valid answer. Sadly, I am not versed with the subject, so I can't comment on that. But yeah, it's probably possible. You can have, yeah, something learning, reading existing texts and then coming up with new theorems, I guess. I'm hoping by ML you meant machine learning and not meta
Yeah,
languages.
yeah. Machine learning.
Wait, who is talking?
Anirudh.
Okay. Okay, you're in first year, right?
Yes.
Okay, I thought Bharat was pulling my leg. Yeah, never mind. Uh, okay. So yeah, we use computers. Like before we jump to the higher step of what in computers, yeah. First thing is, yeah, we try to use computers. Humans are making mistakes, so something not human. Yeah, computers. Okay, this statement is probably not exactly true after with the advent of machine learning, but yeah, keeping that aside, just talking about exact math. Yeah, computers don't really come up with ideas, but you can exactly instruct them and make them follow something humans might not do as expected. People get lazy. You be like, yeah, I don't have to verify for so long. I'll just quickly read this paper and say yes, and I'll go have dinner, something. Yeah, that's not very great. But computers really won't do something like that. But yeah, now the question comes up, like, how do you teach computers math? Math, at least how we interpret it, seems like something that is very human, like something only we can understand. And we teach to different people, we make them build intuition, we teach them a lot of notation. uh, yeah, it seems something slightly higher than what you can just represent in text or just to a computer. And it might be difficult to teach it every specific detail of mathematics, every single field we have so far, algebra, geometry, each of them with their own nuances and details that humans usually build with intuition. Like, if I tell you something like parallel lines don't intersect, you won't really ask me twice why not, because yeah, you somehow immediately create a visual representation of what I just said, and you convince yourself. But a computer, you can't do that. You have to give it like a very specific way of like ascertaining that, yeah, this is what a parallel line is, this is how I represent it, this is what it means to intersect, this is why they don't intersect, etc., which becomes harder. So, and we actually have technology that can do that, and that's called automated theorem provers or proof checkers, to be accurate. They don't actually prove theorems by themselves. You provide them proofs in a certain form, and they verify that these math proofs are actually correct. So yeah, a theorem prover, like in the simplest sense, is just a program that can take in a math proof and code it in a specific format, and then verify that proof, verify it step by step, and tell you that, yeah, okay, this proof is correct. You have proved whatever you started out to prove. And yeah, we also have something called proof assistants, or these are interactive theorem provers. So these are programs to which you can interact. So you can give it a theorem and it will give you the current proof state, and you can ask it to make small changes. You can give it one step at a time, and after every step, it will tell you what you need to prove after that step. So it's like a step by step like debugger for a normal theorem prover. If you if you will. So you'll understand why the interactive part makes it very easy for us, like significantly easier for us to write math proofs shortly. But yeah, we'll discuss that towards the end. So a few popular proof assistants are Coq, Lean, Isabelle, and Agda. Most of my talk is going to be primarily on Lean and Coq. These are two very popular proof assistants. And if for those who are already familiar with the four-color theorem and graph theory, the famous theorem that was proved by a computer, it was proved in Coq. It produced around, I think, 200, 300 page long proof, which till date humans have not fully understood. Like we haven't been able to understand exactly what the proof is. We just know, yeah, it is correct. People have been able to understand parts of the proof, but yeah, the entire proof is still a computer generated one which hasn't been simplified. So yeah, theorem provers have helped us prove things that we know, I mean, we expected, but humans were, at least currently, are not able to prove. So yeah, so before I go into the details, just to um, like show the real power of these provers, that they're not just some random programs that can do very specific tasks. Like, okay, you can verify, like you given two numbers and you like give the sum, it can just check if they're equal, something like that. You can do like pretty much any math that, yeah, almost pretty much any math, terms and conditions apply, that we can do today as like uh, just undergraduate mathematicians, if you. So this is one theorem. This is the Euler criteria. That is, if you have a number a in the set z mod p, which is basically just a number a which is less than p, positive number less than p, non-zero, then it is said to be a square. So this x is actually a, by the way. I think there's a typo in the documentation. Yeah. So a power p by 2 is 1. So this, yeah, a is set to be, a and x are the same. So a power p by 2 is 1. That implies that a is actually a square. Or this is how you check for whether a number is a quadratic residue or not. And how do you write it in Lean? You say if a not equal to 0, then it implies that these two are equivalent. Like you can see the double implies arrow. Right side says a power p by 2 is 1, and the left side says there exists a y such that y square is equal to a. Okay, so this is a very simple representation, and you can see it's like, I mean, there is a little bit of extra bracketing and everything to make it like formal, and so that a computer can parse without any ambiguity. But you can see how natural the representation is. This is almost how a normal like math student would write it. You write the theorem, you write the name, these are the arguments, like p is some number n, and yeah, you're just telling that p is a prime. Like you're just giving the fact that p is a prime, and then you're taking a number a which is less than p, and you're ascertaining this theorem. Another one is, yeah, the most famous, elegant one. This theorem is supposed to have multiple different beautiful proofs. Yeah, the fact that there are infinitely many prime numbers, as simple as that. So if you pick any natural number n, there exists a natural number p such that p is greater than or equal to n and p is a prime. This function just tells if it's a prime or not. Yeah, this is the four square theorem. That is, any number can be expressed as a sum of four integer squares. So simple, a square plus b square plus c square plus d square is equal to n. Like there exists four numbers. And finally, one last example, the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. That is, if you take the inner product of x and y, the absolute value, so now mod x dot y. So I hope you can see the right side. Less than equal to mod x into mod y. So yeah, this just says, this is basically exactly how you'd write. There's the name for a function, which is basically just the name for this dot. So this has inner dot inner is just going to take two arguments, return their inner product, absolute value of that, less than equal to mod x times mod y. Okay, so now like you know that okay, these theorem provers are able to understand math to the same level as like human mathematicians. to the same level as textbooks. So you can feed in a textbook and ask it to verify proofs. Not exactly, like you'll have to make some slight tweaks so that it fits the exact notation. Like there are stricter rules that you have to follow, and it can't prove pretty much everything because most of the current provers work on a subset of mathematics, which is like vast enough to explore most common, like most powerful results, but it can't prove everything. Like I mean, or rather, everything that is there in a textbook. Everything is a different story. But yeah, you can't prove everything that is proven by humans so far, but you can pretty much capture a lot of things that we have done so far. So yeah, now coming to the part where how these things work. So we've seen like a few examples of how these theorems will look, how these provers, like what syntax or notation these provers follow. But how do we build a theorem prover? Or how are these created? So directly trying to plug in textbook LaTeX notation is not a good idea because there are a lot of ambiguities. It's hard to parse, hard for half the time.
One
Hard
second.
for yeah.
Yeah, we are making provers or proof checkers. So
Okay,
like
so theorem prover here actually refers to a broad class of programs. They're mostly proof checkers with a few additional abilities. Like they can do certain types of proof searches and discover proofs by themselves. So they're just not checkers, they're slightly more powerful. But yeah, they don't blindly prove anything by themselves. But yeah, they're not
so,
also checkers, somewhere in between.
so as an argument, we'll give it a theorem or a like proof, like steps of the proof.
Okay, how will you write down the steps of the proof?
Like let's say like we need to prove root 2 is irrational.
Okay.
Then like I can write root 2 is irrational as an argument, or like the
Yeah,
steps
okay.
to
You will write down SQRT2 is IS irrational. Fine. Okay, let's just write it down. So you'll pass it this thing. Okay.
or should I pass it like let 2 be in p by q form and like all the steps?
Yeah, how do you tell that 2 is in P by Q form? Like you have to define, like the computer doesn't understand, like for example, here there are three things, like four things. There's SQRT, there's a 2, there's IS, and there's irrational. The computer has to understand what each of these words are. It has to interpret them. So if you write your own theorem proof checker, if it reads this line of text, how does it understand what you mean? Like how will it interpret if you say like A is B? Like how will it understand how to relate A and B exactly if it sees an is joining them? For us, like most of the times it's implicit and self-explanatory. When you say this is that, yeah, it's pretty simple, but you can't be so ambiguous. So one thing you can say is uh, rational, let's say, is basically going to be I can't get that. The R minus rational, right? So this is one way of saying it. So if you can actually construct this, like, okay, the right side is clear now, but the left side is still not clear. You have to somehow find a way of mentioning this. You can't pass like what the fractional value of this. You have to explicitly encode square root of 2 as an algebraic entity. So it's no longer like that simple. And yeah, like the more complex math proofs get and math fields get, yeah, you will have to have a more solid way in which you can formalize any theorem of your choice. It should not work for any specific theorems. Like irrespective of what somebody feeds in, it has to be generic enough to take that in and interpret it exactly, and then check every step of the proof. So you will have to also rewrite your proof steps to make it understand that okay, this is what you mean by this. Okay. So what we do here is there's this famous result called the Curry-Howard correspondence, which talks about the equivalence between mathematical proofs and computer programs. So every math proof has an equivalent computer program associated with it. So that is nice, right? So we know that, okay, now we have some way of converting these proofs into programs. Now the question is, how do you do that? How do you represent it, and how do you represent it correctly, rather, so that a checker can, without making mistakes, without getting confused, check what you're doing. Okay, so let's start with the basic. So we have math objects on the left side of the slide. So we'll start with proposition, as simple as that. And I will give you a simple mapping. So I'm going to map propositions to sets. So I'm going to show an equivalence, a very nice, simple equivalence between these, and how all proposition theory transforms to set theory. And yeah, then, like, for now, don't worry about the Curry-Howard part. We'll come to that later. There's still a little bit of math with setting in place. So now, what is equivalent for a proof? So I say small p is a proof of capital P. So small p is basically, you can say the proof is basically a list of steps you write down to show that P is true. So what will the equivalence be? So it turns out it's an element. So what is the set we're dealing with? So a proposition is a set of what? Set of all proofs of that proposition. So every element in the set is a proof for that. As simple as that. So how will I say that, like, a particular proposition is true? If a proposition is true, it becomes a theorem, right? Like, how do I say that? When can I say that a proposition is true? Simple. The set has to be non-empty. Huh?
That's what I said.
Yeah. So it has to be non-empty. So if the set has any element, like, it doesn't matter how many it has, or like how they are related to each other, or like a proposition could have multiple proofs. Like, you could prove a theorem in how many other different ways you want. But whether it's true or not is a more universal fact. Whether the corresponding set of proofs is non-empty. And now a little more logic. So when you say and, so P and Q are two propositions. P and Q is another proposition. So P and Q is another proposition. How do I write it in set notation? This Cartesian product. Why? Because to be able to prove that P and Q is true, I need to produce a proof for P and produce a proof for Q. That means I have to produce an element in P and produce an element in Q. Or I should produce a pair of elements, the first one coming from P and the second one coming from Q. So it will be something like, right? So this set will contain all pairs of proofs of P and Q, like, squashed together. So if I want to be able to prove this entire proposition P and Q, I'll just pick one of these elements, say P1, Q1, and that proves that, yeah, both P and Q are true. Next thing is logical, like a proposition or P or Q. Like, you have to say either, like, one of them is at least true. It's possible that Q is an empty set, like Q is false, but P is true, and you should still be able to produce something. How will you do that? Pretty simple. Use something called disjoint union. So for those who are not familiar with it, disjoint union is almost like union, but you also remember where it came from. So if, let's say, P is an element like P1, P2, and Q is an element Q1, Q2, Q3, then so the disjoint union will be pairs of this form. P1 coming from P. So let's say, yeah, and P2 coming from P, Q2 coming from Q, Q3, Q1, Q3 coming from Q. Yeah, so there are 5 elements. So what does this mean? So P has 2 different proofs and Q has 3 different proofs. So how many ways are there of proving P or Q? There are 5 different ways, right? You can produce any one of these proofs and I will accept that P or Q is true. And why are we putting this extra annotation? So that you, like, it's just a technical thing. We just want to know like what P1 is proving. Like you just want to remember what it is a proof of, not just okay, it just proved something, and like later if you look at it, you just won't know where it came from. So this is called disjoint union. And finally, you want to show P implies Q. That is, if P is true, then Q has to be true. If P is false, Q can be anything. So here true means non-empty and false means empty in the set domain. And this becomes just functions. So if the only case in which you won't be able to make a function is if P has an element. If say P is P1, like P is just a single term, or P1, P2, and Q is empty, and you cannot make a function from P to Q. Because when you say a function, like for every element in P, it has to map to an element in Q, but there are no elements. So this is something that's true, and this is something that's false. So this is false because it doesn't exist, right? There is no such function. That implies that, yeah, if you have true implies false, that thing combined becomes false. But in any other case, you can construct. So if P is empty and Q is empty, then yeah, you can just have a function. You can just define a useless function that doesn't have to do anything. Like it only has to be worried if you give it a value of P, but there is no such thing. So yeah, the function is just defined. Or if P has something and Q has, if P has a lot of elements, you can still define it like f of anything is equal to Q1. You don't have to, it doesn't matter what you return, it just has to be something of this form. So yeah, implies basically becomes functions. So now we have, I hope everything's clear. If not, you can stop me now before we move on to the next part. Okay. So now we have this nice equivalence between just any math and writing it in terms of sets and functions on like functions, union, intersection, like disjoint union, Cartesian product, and how to interpret what a set being empty or non-empty is. But still, we're far away from like teaching a computer to understand it, right? So now we go on to the next step where we actually make this computer ready. So here's like the breakthrough. So we say that, yeah, these sets actually map to types. So I hope most of you are familiar with at least one programming language from school, or at least the first few lectures in CPRO. So you know what types are. Simple example of types in C++ could be int or char, void, bool. A lot of them are there. So, and now you can obviously see why set is equivalent to type, right? So, in pretty much in C at least, the primitive types are actually sets from basic math. Your int type is the set of all integers. With the caveat, it can only store like up to a certain limit. So it's a subset of all integers. But yeah, theoretically, assume it can store anything you want, any integer you want. So int is the set of all integers, z. Char is the alphabet set, A to Z, 20. Like okay, char is actually stores a lot more, but you can think of it as, yeah, it stores A to Z, 1 to 9, something like that. Bool stores two values, like has two values, true and false, which is basically the Boolean set of Boolean values. Okay, and similarly, any type is basically just a collection of elements, which are called values. So yeah, an element in the set is basically a value of this type. So if your set was, like to give an example, if your set was Z, then your element could be 0, and your type, the corresponding type would be int, and the value would be some like int x equals 0. So yeah, I'll just remove the unnecessary int. So x is the value, I mean a variable which is just a placeholder, but 0 is the value of type int, right? So we already have a well-established equivalence between what a set is and what a type is. And yeah, elements are basically just values. Now, how do we extend whatever we have defined so far? So what will a non-empty set correspond to? So it will correspond to something called an inhabited type. An inhabited type is just a type which has at least one value of it. So int is an inhabited type. Bool is an inhabited type. Why? Because you can say true. Or char is an inhabited type because you can actually declare something. Can somebody give me an example of an empty set or a type which has no values?
A void.
Void.
Yep, exactly. Void is a type that has no values. So it's a valid type. When you say return void, you're actually returning nothing. So it's a scam way of saying like don't return anything. So yeah, we have, so these are all non-empty sets, or they correspond to true things. That is, we'll come to the theorem part. These are all non-empty sets which correspond to theorems, and this is an empty set which corresponds to something being false. So if you show that a theorem it's the same as void, then basically you're just saying that it's not true. Yeah. So the next thing is and. What do you think and will become? It will simply become a pair. So this is the C++ pair, or if you're not familiar with that, you can just think of a struct. So P and Q is a struct. What does it have inside? It has one value of type P and one value of type Q. That is, remember, when you want to produce a proof for this, you want to produce an element of this. So it's a pair of elements, P, small p in P and small q in Q, and which is precisely what we're like capturing in this. So if you, for example, think of it as pair int car as your type, and to produce a proof for this, you can say, I don't know, let's say 0 and A. So this is a pair that shows that int has an element and char has an element together. Right? Simple as that. So pairs basically are the equivalent of the elements of Cartesian product. So this is the corresponding type for that. The next thing is, how do you represent disjoint union? Luckily, C already has the exact type that we need, that is the union type. For those not familiar, union is basically a type that, not a type, a type construct that is used to build types where you want to save memory. If you know that in your program, you will not have both of these, but rather you want to store one of these, but you don't just know beforehand which one you're storing, you can use a union. So it only allows, it has overlapping storage. So it only allows you to store one of these values correctly at any point of time in the code. So union, so how do you create a union? So I can say P or Q something, like this is the value, and then I say PQ dot P is 0, like if P is my int and Q is my char. Notice that I have not set what Q is, and I don't need to. I can have union, okay, that won't be correct, but if I can have P is equal to int and Q is equal to void, and I can still make construct a valid value of the type P or Q, even though Q doesn't have anything, because it doesn't matter. This you don't have to. C++ exactly won't accept this, but yeah, like you get the essence of the argument. And finally, functions. Yeah, like you already have functions. So look at this function. So this function f is basically an inhabited here. So f is a function from P to Q. It's simple. It takes a P and returns a Q. Just as simple as that. So now we have a nice mapping from just math to types. And why types? Because we know for sure that types can be encoded into like a computer correctly and efficiently, and they can be manipulated by programs. And pretty much like every programming language does this, right? It handles types. So now we have a way in which we can make a computer understand these normal math constructs that seemed somewhat human-like and intuitive into something very definitively computer-like. Okay. So, are there any questions so far with this? Okay. So here are a few more examples. These are a little more tricky and not exactly accurate. So if you don't follow them, it doesn't matter. But those who are interested, you can just have see what we can do more. So we define propositions. We can also define predicates. So here P is a predicate which takes in an X where X belongs to some other set S. What is the equivalent for that? This is a function. It's a function that P is a function that takes in a value of type S and returns a proposition. Your prop is just the collection of all propositions in the universe. If you hand wavily, but yeah, if you allow that, yeah, it's a collection of all possible propositions that anybody can come up with. So it takes some X in S and returns a proposition. The next thing, how do we now we have predicates, and along with quantifiers, we pretty much have very powerful math. So how do we encode there exists? So I want to encode this thing into a type. So I want to say there exists X in S such that Px. So remember what we're doing. We want to encode this into a type such that if that type has a value, then this statement is true or has a proof. The value is the proof, not the type itself. So we want to make sure that if this statement is false, for example, if P of X is just false for everything, then the type should not have any value. It should be somewhat equivalent to void. But if P of X is indeed true, say S is integers and P of X is even, then it is true, right? You can just push give X equal to 0 or X equal to 2, and that works. Then the type should have some value that tells you that, okay, this type is non-empty, therefore the corresponding proposition is true. So this is a little involved. So this is actually a dependent type. It's I mean, at least to my knowledge, I don't know how to define this in C++, and I didn't want to use Haskell or any other functional language for the talk. So we'll just look at the math notation. So this is the type. So it's some sigma xs px, and the elements are of the form a comma pa. So a is some element in S. So this type is basically some pairs where the first element is going to be some element in S, and the second element pa is the proof of that. So it is an element in P of A. So A belongs to S and PA belongs to sorry, I should have probably written that down. Okay. Yeah, so A is in S and PA is in P of A. So notice that the first set is just a set, but this one actually depends on the first argument. So this is not a very simple type to define. So this is what we call dependent type, because the second element comes from a type that is dependent on the first argument. So yeah, as simple as that. You want to form a pair such that A and S and PA is this. So what is PA here? It's just a proof that this proposition P of A is true. Okay. So if you think of P of X is the proposition that X is even, then your S will be int or Z. So A in Z and PA in P of A. That is, PA is basically A is even. Okay. So how do you show this? You can pick A equal to 0. So 0 is in Z and P0 is in P0. So P0 is some proof that A is even, 0 is even. And you can just use the definition, invoke it, just say that. Specific theorem provers have certain specific ways of actually describing proofs, but irrespective of that, you'll always be able to describe it in some way by constructing these values. And finally, the last thing is the for all quantifier. and that becomes something called the product type, which is a function. Like this is also dependent. So the left side, it goes from S to something, but it's dependent on what S you pass. So you pass it some particular value X, then it will return a value in Px. So why is this for all? Because notice that to this function f, you can pass any x of your choice and you will always get an element of the corresponding Px. That is, whatever x you choose, you have a proof that P of that x is true. And whatever x basically just becomes for all x, normal English translation. So yeah, these are a few extra equivalences to using dependent types. Yeah, so now finally let's just conclude. Like, I mean, even if you ignore this part, if you just look at the previous definitions, these equivalences, what does it become? So we want to build a proof checker. What is a proof checker effectively now after doing these so-called like equivalent transformations? It just becomes a type checker or a compiler. A compiler is basically something that does a little more. Actually, it checks the types, and then once it's finished, it like some of like C compiler, for example, checks if everything is correct and then generates code that can be run. But if you just make C just compile and not generate code, then it becomes a type checker. You can actually implement, like you can use C or not C, you can use C++ to implement a pretty simple like theorem prover if you want. Not implement, like you can write C++ code to prove theorems if you want. Very tedious, but it's possible. So your proof checker is basically a type checker. It just checks types and just makes sure that the proof you return actually matches the type of the theorem or the proposition you're trying to prove. As simple as that. And that computers can do very well. So what does your task of writing proofs become? It becomes you have to write a program that effectively, with a lot of a sequence of steps, builds a value of the type you're trying to prove, right? And we have these things called interactive proof assistants that I mentioned before, like Coq, Lean, Isabelle, Agda, to name a few. And they just help you in doing these constructions, because just doing it by hand with just Naive Curry Howard is very tedious. If you look at how, like, as you make the propositions a little more complicated, the constructions become like exponentially harder and harder to do by hand. So we have these proof checkers that assist you. How do they assist you? They make these constructions simpler by abstracting a lot of internal details and exposing a certain library called tactics. So these tactics are basically some special statements that your proof assistant will recognize, and it will use that to modify the proof state. So you start with a certain proof state, that is, you want to prove something. Every step you do, you try to modify the proof state till you end up at the state true, that is, you're done, right? So how do these proof assistants help? They'll just use more high level instructions that they internally do all the extra work with all this like type managing and everything, and expose a nice interface for you to be able to express in a more natural human like way, rather than like building like huge types from scratch. So this is how a proof assistant looks. This is the Coq proof assistant, a plugin. This screenshot is its plugin in VS Code. So this is just a random step in the proof. So what does this interface mean? So I'm trying to prove this theorem. The name is Malt S1, and what is the theorem? For all natural numbers, if m is n plus 1, s is successor, so n plus 1, then m into 1 plus n is equal to m square. Is that correct? Oh yeah, it is correct, because Sn is equal to m. Yeah, I mean, obviously I proved it, so it has to be correct. But yeah, so we just want to show this. So Sn is one way of defining it, 1 plus n is another way. So these are not directly equivalent. So we have to just do a little more to show that. And you can see this is the intermediate proof state. These are all the things you have, and this is what you need to prove. and you can use these things called these tactics. So there's intro, simple, rewrite. Just don't worry about the details, but they're just simple instructions or commands that you can pass, which will make the prover modify its current proof state till you're done. Okay. I think I can just show a demo. This is the current proof state. So I want to prove this. This is what I'm trying to prove. And I'm stepping through the proof. I call this tactic, which does a lot of simplifications. I rewrite something, and notice that now I have something of the form A is equal to A. Left and right side are exactly the same expression. So now the proof checker can actually accept it. So this tactic called reflexivity will accept anything of this form. So now notice what happens when I do this. It says no more sub goals. Sub goal is basically whatever I'm trying to prove. Like here, there's only one goal, but yeah, there are no more goals left, and we're finished. So we'll end the proof with the QED. And yeah, so we've just proved something simple, that is m into, like if m is 1 plus n, then m into 1 plus n is m square. This is equal to this. Okay. Yeah, so for yeah, so for those interested, I think a good start would be to learn, like there's this nice interactive gamified tutorial to learn some theorem proving. It starts out with proving just basics of natural numbers like addition, multiplication, just simple theorems about that, and some propositions and functions and inequalities towards the end. So I'll just open few. So yeah, like it has different levels. Each level you'll have to prove some lemma or some theorem. So here, for example, level 2 in addition is, you have to prove that addition is associative. So what is it? A plus B plus C is A plus B plus C. And okay, sorry is just saying that you give up on the proof, but you can remove that and actually start writing the proof. So you can interactively write. It's the similar interface. You write the proof here, you see what is going on here, and if you have any mistakes, it'll show up here. This is a nice way. I'll share the link also later so you can have a look. And yeah, and like there are 2 other tutorials or textbooks that you can use if you really get interested later on. So yeah, any questions on like the technical details of theorem provers or what they are?
So, what are the current limitations of this language in terms of what it can and cannot check, and
Okay,
things that people might be working on to improve it?
right. So I'm not exactly sure about the second part of your question, what people are doing to improve existing theorem provers, but what are the limitations? So Coq and Lean, like most of these provers work on specific, what do you call them? Let's say type hierarchies or just types. And the problem with just dealing with sets naively is if you might run into stuff like Russell's paradox, right? And Russell's paradox is just like the point of Russell's paradox was to show that set theory in its naive form is incomplete. Like there are some inconsistencies in its very definition that make it like inaccurate, or you can't use it. But humans are okay with it. You'll just keep using it as long as they're fine. But sadly, with computers, you can't do that. So you need to make sure that whatever type system you're encoding, the corresponding set system for that does not have does not run into Russell's paradox, or any other issue like that. So there are numerous issues with constructions of sets which are overcome by different axiomatic theories. Like you have ZFC, which tries to more formally build it, but ZFC becomes like much harder to fully encode into like a theorem prover that has to run like quickly. For example, though like the libraries do have ZFC implemented, but like you don't use that as the base of your prover. So these provers use something called inductive types. So they have hierarchies of types. So int, okay, like the inductive and the hierarchy is not the same. But yeah, these provers use a specific kind of types called inductive types on which they build everything. So if you can express your math in terms of inductive types, then yeah, you can write your theorems and write your proofs. But it's not necessary that all math so far can be expressed. A lot of math has been. I'm not exactly sure of what hasn't. So, for example, this is what Lean's current math library looks like. Like if you look at the left side with the list of all topics, it looks like, yeah, it's pretty complete. But they've proved like whatever they could with the definitions they could. Some of the definitions get very, very annoyingly complicated. For example, you've all done calculus in school. Just let's look at how this L hospital rule looks. Yeah, it's not very nice to look at. You need to have a little more tricky definitions. You have to define. Natural numbers are very easy to define. You can just define them by saying, okay, we have 0, then we have like 0, like after 0 we have 1, after 1 we have 2, but real numbers can't be defined like that very easily. So they have like a very cryptic way of defining it, and then you define your theorems on that. So yeah, if it is like, and there are limitations. Like there are certain things that cannot be encoded. I'm not exactly sure of examples now. I'll try to look them up and tell later. But yeah, like basically the trade-off here is you try to make your type system weaker in the sense that it can only do so many tasks to make it complete, so that whatever task it can do correctly, efficiently, and finish. Yeah, and whatever theorems you can represent, you should be able to prove, yeah, true or false. But there might be theorems you can't represent, then yeah, you just can't.
Right.
So different, like if I only know Koch and Lean like in detail, so they use calculus, something called calculus of inductive constructions. Or I think, yeah, that is the title. Yeah, and yeah, they have certain limitations.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So the final thing would be like, yeah, the importance of this. I briefly went over it in the start, but why? Like somebody has to finally write down these languages, right? Somebody has to write down these libraries. What if somebody made a mistake in implementing the proof checker itself? Maybe there's a bug, and because of that bug, the proof checker is going to accept wrong proofs, and that's going to basically break the entire system, right? Which is very possible because finally humans are only writing the code for this, at least so far. GPT-3 hasn't taken over yet. But how is this any better? So one thing is, before, when you had to trust a mathematical result or a paper, you would have to trust whoever reviewed that particular paper. And there are so many results published all over the world in so many fields, and different people are reading it. And it's possible that some random person has made some mistake somewhere across the globe. And it's going to be very hard to track or like make that person fix his mistake or like re-verify if you feel that something is off. But here, you're just trusting one single system, like one well implemented single, like mostly open source system that everybody has access to read. So anybody can verify at any point if you feel like it's wrong. And as long as the core kernel of your prover is correct, you can be sure that whatever you've produced on top of it is correct. And let's say something turns out to be wrong. There was a bug. You fix the bug and you instantly see what all break. Like you try to compile all your proofs that you've written so far, like all proofs everyone has written. And yeah, you will see that a lot of them are now not getting accepted. And you know what all proofs have to be rewritten. You don't have to explicitly go through all the proofs and find out, okay, is this correct? Is this wrong? Like, do our changes affect this? You just instantly find it. The computer does that selection for you. And one more reason would be like now, because they're all computerized, they're stored in a much more like searchable archive format. So you can retrieve proofs much more easily. You don't have to Google search and like type in specific things and struggle with getting math notation in Google search bar. A lot of normal things you'll have to do. You'll have to ask your advisor. You'll have to ask like other people who know, like who studied this, etc., etc. It's a lot of effort. Here you don't have to do anything. You can look You can look up for a certain proof that fits in a certain pattern by using just simple pattern-based searches. So you just try to search and you see, okay, like is there some theorem that looks similar to what I'm expecting? And then you look at the theorem, see if the statement looks like what you want. So almost all these proof assistants also provide search functionality. You can give it like certain search patterns with like blanks and like different things to match, like regexes, and it'll try to look for a theorem that matches the pattern you gave. And that way you can easily look up stuff and make sure that, yeah, okay, you're looking through the entire library, like a well-indexed library, rather than just an ad hoc search for 5 minutes, which only lists the top, like the first page of Google results, because nobody ever goes to the second page. But yeah, Google does generate all the other pages too. So yeah.
And what's been the Math Society's reception to the software? Are lots of proofs these days being checked using the software? So is the database you talked about with the
coming to
these
that,
proofs?
exactly.
Yeah.
So like I'm not exactly sure how many mathematicians have accepted this, but I know a few of them who have and are trying. So for example, there's this professor called Kevin Buzzard, the same person who made this tutorial. So he has this thing called the Xena project. I should have had it open. Where is the GitHub? Yep. So this is an open source project that he's writing, where he makes like his students and his students basically try to formalize more and more of math. And this is called the Xena project. And as you can see the title, it's Lean Library currently studying for a degree at Imperial College. So what does that mean? He wants to augment the library with sufficient proofs and then with sufficient proof search techniques such that it can solve a set of exercises all by itself. So it has enough to be able to just do that. So he has currently he has like M1F, which is a problem set. Like it's a course. So in that he has a few problem sets. So his first step in this project is to be able for this library to be able to prove everything in that problem set without any human, like, yeah, you want to write a tactic which like a single tactic. You just say M1F and it should just solve that problem by looking up like existing proofs, like looking through the library, seeing what fits here, what doesn't. So yeah, so more people are trying to formalize math like this. Most of theorem proving like has been for formalizing computer programs and like verifying logic in computer programs, showing that yes, your programs are semantically correct. And like that has been like done for a pretty long time. There are a lot of math proofs that have been computer generated, but yeah, this is not very widely used by everybody because it is very tedious to finally encode like normal math. So if you ask, like, if you go give it to a first year college student and ask him to write in Lean, it is a learning curve. Like you have to learn a lot more things to be able to fit it into this. But with more time, like these libraries and these proof assistants are becoming more and more natural, that you can represent it in the most human way. So you can actually tell a math student that, okay, you can directly go ahead and start writing proofs without knowing the details. For example, I did explain a lot of equivalences before, right? So even without knowing how they work, you can actually go ahead and try this natural number game. You don't need to know anything. You just need to know that, yeah, these commands do these things, and the internal workings are very like interesting and complicated and very nice to learn. But even without knowing, you can just blindly apply these tools and write down proofs. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. So there has been like a slight increase in interest slowly, and uh, like theorem proving libraries focusing on developing like more functionality for core math, not just for program verification math. Yeah. So if anyone is interested, like, yeah, the Xena project also, like, you can actually contribute to it. Like, anybody can contribute actually. So he started this initiative called Lean for the Curious Mathematician 2020. Like, so everybody is free to like learn from the tutorials he's provided and then try to write more proofs. So Kevin Buzzard has been very active in trying to engage more and more of the math community to learn formally specifying math and using these proof systems, proof assistants to be able to write more rigorous math. Like, one advantage is that a computer won't accept anything arbitrary. So you can actually go tell your friend something and, confuse him, say blah blah, and they will somehow accept even if it's slightly incomplete. But a computer won't. Like, you have to be exactly precise every step you mention and finally prove that fully to be able to make it accept. So in some sense, like, a computer verified proof has more value. Like, that, yeah, it's more likely to be correct, significantly more likely to be correct than a human verified proof. Okay, I think I've taken more than an hour. Yeah, any questions about anything, any doubts or questions?
How would something like a proof generator work? Like,
Okay, so for example, Coq has certain proof search tactics. So what they try to do is, like, they look at the current proof state. So I'll actually show a demonstration. Let's see. So we're here, right? So, like, we're at some state. So I say auto, and it just solved it. Like, I didn't say anything about how to do. So how it does it is, it has the entire library of all the previously proved things, right? So it tries to look at what things can match here, or what things can match into subproofs. So it already has certain tactics that are rewrite, and it can rewrite parts, it can do some substitutions and everything. So what it does is, it tries to do some substitutions, tries to do some rewriting, and then see if it matches an already existing theorem. Or it looks at the existing theorem and tries to see, okay, can I do a simple rewrite? Like, a rewrite here would just be like, okay, look at this. This rule says m is equal to Sn, right? So it automatically knows that, okay, wherever it finds m, it can substitute it with Sn. So, like, it's not some complex intelligent search. It's just a brute force search, seeing, like, okay, if it has a equals b, it knows a can be substituted with b. So if I do auto, probably one of the things it tries is, okay, let's see what all equalities we have. Okay, we have n is equal to Sn. Substitute this here. So Sn, 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 and then it does some simplifications based on how star and how plus are defined. And yeah, then it tries to keep running these simplifications, keep expanding these functions continuously, and yeah, finally arrives at the proof. So I can't explain exactly how this example works, because that will require a lot more details into the workings of Coq and inductive types, how it's defined. But yeah, in some sense, it does a brute force search based on all the library and all the information it has. So I can just say auto, and yeah, I'm done. In fact, I don't need to do anything. I can just say auto. So this theorem is trivial. I don't have to do anything to prove it. So, I mean, you might be wondering about how powerful it is. I have actually proved a couple of theorems without knowing how the hell they were correct, or how to prove them. So this does enable you to prove stuff that you might not be able to prove normally. But still, you can't trust your proofs. Like, it's not like you've done something random and you're like, okay, I just guessed it and it might not be correct. No, the proof checker has accepted it. Like, I was just randomly running a lot of different tactics, doing a lot of brute force searches, like a lot of random rewriting, and finally the theorem got proved. Just got lucky. So it does happen. So you can actually prove things without knowing how to prove them. Like, not very useful if you want to understand it, but is useful if that is just a random lemma that doesn't really matter and you just want to quickly be able to use it. Or like, it's somebody else's result, like somebody else's work, and you just want to quickly reproduce it without worrying thinking too much, so that you can use the theorem in whatever you're doing later on. So yeah, any other like queries? Did I go too fast, or was there anything that was just poorly explained? I can go back and clarify if necessary. Oh, okay. There's a huge discussion which I forgot Lambeck. Oh yeah, I mean, Kari Howard Lambeck is the full name. Like it's popularly just called Kari Howard, so it's pretty sad. Isn't that format? I think some. Why is there FLT on the right window? I just put it to write some text, and like there was a margin, so I just thought it would be like funny to put that. Yeah, I just wanted to see if the text was big enough or not. Can we represent the dependent pairs with a pair of the type and a function pointer? Not exactly like the. Yeah, lambdas and function pointers are not Turing complete, but luckily templates are. But it's oh, okay. We are talking about something else. As in, there are programs you can write in C, but not in Coq. Yeah, Coq. These theorem provers are not Turing complete. Like you can't write everything you want. Coq only allows those programs that it can guess will terminate. Yeah, precisely. Like it should be able to precisely know that they will terminate. You can't just write whatever you want. Okay, I'm not entirely sure about lean. Could GPT-3 let us directly pass in papers? Pass as in, I don't know what the pass here is.
Like give it direct, like normal mathematical state proofs, like your average student would write without converting it to like lean language.
No, GPT-3 can't do that, at least for now. Like maybe by feeding it the entire library it could, but yeah, I don't think it's very feasible to do that. Is this unit and integration testing for mathematicians? Yeah, you could think of it like that. Yeah, it's testing for mathematicians.
Is this sort of like the same idea behind symbolic AI? Like we just try to build a database of like all the things we can represent, and then we try to build relations to them with like logical things.
Okay. I'm not aware of what symbolic AI is, so I don't think I can comment on that.
Okay.
Yeah, if there are no other questions, I think we'll just can stop the recording and meet. Okay. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Stopping the recording.